The 13th chapter of the apocalyptic book of John the Revelator presents a graphic portrayal of two megalomaniac beasts, powers that rule at some time during the history of planet Earth, whose ability to influence and dictate extend to the furthest corners of the globe. It is revealed through biblical evidence that these powers receive their authority from the dragon, which according to the scriptures is Satan. It is further revealed through the symbolic language contained in this chapter that a cosmic battle of gigantic proportions between good and evil is finding its tangible fulfillment in the physical activities of human affairs, the visible symptoms of a massive spiritual controversy. The Bible describes a deliberate cooperation between the powers of the spiritual and physical realms, a cooperation between the highest levels of human operation and authorities of sinister spiritual dimensions that span almost the entire history of humanity. As hard as this may be for many to accept, there is little doubt that in order for such an all-encompassing effort to find its decreed fulfillment, a conspiracy of unimagined proportions needed to be conceived. Indeed, only as we embark on an in-depth exploration of history will we be able to reveal the specific identity of the powers, human and otherwise, that are hidden in the cryptic descriptions of prophetic symbolism. In light of these considerations and current events, what you are about to witness could very well be one of the most significant and timely exposés of recent times. Our journey begins in the context of a perfect society that existed eons ago. A society whose laws of coexistence were based on the perfect principles of love for their fellow beings and love for God who created them. In this perfect society, where God gave every being the freedom to choose whether they would remain loyal to Him and His government or not, Lucifer, an angel of supreme authority and power, began to question the fairness of the government of God and aspired to put himself in the place of God. The war that followed this rebellion against the laws of God, resulting in the expulsion of Lucifer from heaven, along with a third of the angels that chose to side with him, ultimately shifted the focus of the battle to the human inhabitants of a newly created planet called Earth. Lucifer's strategy of destruction and revenge was comprehensive and multifaceted in its dimensions. But at the core of his plan was the desire to usurp the worship that belonged to God alone and direct it toward himself. From the very first insinuations presented to Eve at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden, and consequently through succeeding ages, Lucifer has attempted to set up a counterfeit system of law and religious worship, very often in the process blending aspects of his own false system with characteristics of the true. This fallen angel, who now carried the dubious title of Satan, the Prince of Darkness, began to channel his ideas through human agents that not only communicated his deceptions, but became actively involved in establishing his cause in the real world. Direct links from present-day manifestations of his plan can be traced back to the post-antediluvian world and the Genesis account of the building of the Tower of Babel and the occult belief system that inspired its construction. Connected to this was the desire to establish a so-called perfect society based on satanically inspired ideals that would supposedly help man to escape the wrath of God should he ever decide to destroy the world again. Man's quest to control his own destiny and to worship a God that would give him freedom to define his own values and moral parameters was the central desire in his pursuit to bring all other humanity under his control and establish a new global order. Those throughout history who sought to implement this plan would stop at nothing, be it through deception or brute force, to realize their dream. A dream to rebuild the mythical city of Atlantis, described by Plato 2,500 years ago and believed by many to have existed in the antediluvian world. And along with this, to re-establish the principles that guided that society. The question will no doubt be asked: who, what, and if anything, is involved in the pursuit of this apparently far-fetched occult agenda today? If such a mystical concept as a perfect Atlantean society is in fact believed in and being implemented, then who are the players and what powers, human or otherwise, might these players have at their disposal? Indeed, can history, the Bible, and the unfolding of present-day events really confirm the veracity of such an agenda? There are those who believe that this is not only possible, but that there is overwhelming evidence to establish it as fact.
"400 years ago, Bacon, like many of his contemporaries, believed that Atlantis was America itself."
He was trying to lay a foundation for what could be accomplished in the New World. Bacon was the head of Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism.
He had a huge influence through being the chief of the Rosicrucian fraternity at the time. He had a huge influence on the birth of modern Freemasonry. And many of those Rosicrucians actually went into Freemasonry at that time to lift it up to its new level. And Freemasonry has a major influence on the founding of America.
The president talks about how we want to bring democracy to all these countries of the world. Well, why doesn't he want to bring a republic to these countries? We were a republic. We were never a democracy. It is only the people from the mystery religions and the secret societies who are pushing this idea of world democracy, or this combination of enlightened nations, enlightened democracies to rule the world. As incredible as it may seem, there are really people who believe that. They're working full-time to accomplish that goal. And until you understand that they are the primary force behind the wars of this last century and World War III, which we are entering into today, unless they understand that the whole idea is to create this reestablishment of what they would believe is lost Atlantis.
When our founders declared a new order of the ages, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled.
Various evidences may undoubtedly point to America as being the nation to fulfill the Luciferian dream of a new Atlantis. But what sinister mechanisms have moved over centuries of time to push this nation in the direction of fulfilling this calling? It is not a simple task to discover all the players that make up the complicated web of secret societies and their connected organizations. Many researchers focus on one or two aspects, but hardly ever connect all the dots so as to bring one to a view of the power that controls and negotiates the course that all of its subservient bodies pursue. It is only as one goes back to the ancient revelations that God gave to His prophets that you can effectively begin to see the complete picture unfold. Many believe that the primary key to unlocking and understanding the prophetic code of Scripture is to be found in Daniel's record of King Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2.
Daniel chapter 2 is quite an amazing prophecy. In fact, it is a prophecy that lasts 2,500 years. It begins with the head of gold, which represents Babylon. Then it follows to the silver arms and chest that represents Medo-Persia. And then from Medo-Persia, it extends down to the Grecian Empire, the bronze belly and thighs. And then finally, the legs are completely of iron, representing the Roman Empire. And then the feet represent the division of the Roman Empire into 10 parts in 476 AD. So in that prophecy, it consists the history from all the way from Babylon, all the way up to the very end of time. And in the prophecy ends when the rock strikes the image and destroys it, which represents the second coming of Christ.
In Daniel, we have a key to the book of Revelation. In fact, the two books, Daniel and Revelation, go hand in hand. The symbolism that we find in the book of Revelation is actually borrowed from the whole of the Bible, but the images are borrowed from the book of Daniel specifically. Jesus says in Matthew 24, when He was questioned about the signs of the end, that we should study the book of Daniel.
The belief is that when one discovers the keys to unlock the symbolic language of Bible prophecy and builds upon this vision, you are able to, far more effectively, interpret the subsequent prophecies found in Daniel 7, 8, 9, and onwards. Indeed, in light of these prophecies and the record of history and present events, Revelation chapter 13, with its description of two powerful beasts, practically becomes an open book. It is thus expedient, in order to accurately expose these baleful powers that have been attempting to manipulate the course of human history, to take a more comprehensive journey into the ancient writings of biblical prophecy.
We have to use biblical criteria in order to deal with biblical things. So I've put together a little dictionary here of prophetic terms where they are defined in the Bible, and we have to use the Bible definitions. A trumpet or a wind are symbols of war in the Bible. Water or sea in the Bible represents nations when it's in a prophetic sense. The waters you saw are peoples and nations and multitudes and kings. Revelation 17 verse 5. And a beast in the Bible, in a prophetic sense, is a kingdom. Daniel chapter 7 verse 17 says, and the beasts which you saw are kingdoms or kings. And a king stands for a kingdom. A horn in the Bible also represents a king or a kingdom. So out of a kingdom can arise a number of horns. That means the kingdom will disintegrate and many kingdoms will arise out of that kingdom.
Daniel chapter 7 is a classic example of how God many times teaches in His Word. He will say something once, and then He will enlarge upon it, the repeat enlarge principle as it's called in the Bible. And we see the exact same order as we find in Daniel 2. For example, the first beast of Daniel 7, which is